For those of you who already heard something about economic theory, yeah? So there is this term global commons or global public good. Maybe you already heard about that, yeah? So if you consider the atmosphere as a global public good, yeah? So then we can easily interpret the whole situation, yeah? So if China and India emit a lot of CO2 emissions, yeah? So they perceive this competitive mode. But we all of us kind of suffer of this situation, yeah? So because you cannot exclude anyone from these CO2 emissions, yeah? So this is the whole challenge with these global goods, yeah? So individual behavior really leads to a worse, so this competitive behavior really leads to a worse situation in the end, whereas if we all cooperate in a collective action, then we would be much better off. And yeah, this should like, or with this, we would like to open the whole lecture today, and now Kanike will take over with the policy issue, because how can you deal with these global commons? Yeah, so there are bottom-up approaches with that, but there's also a lot on international level in policy issues that where you could work on this, how to solve this issue, because yes, we all as countries have to kind of come up with a joint solution, because we all suffer amongst this situation.
Thank you very much, Claudia. So I would like to proceed from this point on, specifically addressing the policy issues, and as Claudia has indicated, that what was undertaken on international level. That international level meaning what do the states did between each other to address the issues of the climate change in particular. So the issue that, like in the 8 different, I'm mistaken, that the issue of the climate change that is considered to be a common problem that have arisen in the end of the 1980s, and after that, within the United Nations framework, after that you can see in here that there was an adoption of the United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change. So it was adopted in 1992. So, and specifically what this convention was trying to achieve, that is the country's ability to respond to what is happening and the ability to cooperate on to address the climate change as such. So, as you can see also on the slide, it was indicated that the objective of this particular convention as such is like to stabilize the greenhouse concentrations in the gas concentrations in the atmosphere, on a particular level. So one of the questions for you would be, is the term convention more or less familiar to you from the policy perspective? So basically this means the convention in itself, it's an agreement between states, okay? So, and the states have committed themselves and have accepted this as a part of the obligation. So they would do their best in order to make sure that whatever they have set out in the convention is to be achieved further for the purposes of better activities in this area. So apart from the convention itself, so what was provided on the international level after the development of the climate change convention was that the states also further went to the creation of this intergovernmental panel on the climate change. So from the title itself you can see that, so it's also the ability of between the states to cooperate further on these issues. So basically who can become the member of this panel is like every state who is a member of the United Nations. So, and eventually, this panel's objective is to collect all of the scientific research that would be addressing the issues of climate change. So, also what they're trying to do is they're trying to produce the reports on a particular period basis. So for example, the last report that they made was in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, and a third annual report. So there is the fourth, or was it the fourth? Yeah, so I'm maybe confusing a little bit the issue, but what is important is that they are publishing this assessment report every 7-8 years. So if the last one was published, we can expect the next one coming in a particular period of time. Why? Because like the assessment and the review of all of this data requires some time, and therefore these particular reports are provided again for the states in order to state the current issues in relation to the climate change issues and such. Okay. So one of the things is that there is a United Nations Environmental Program. So it's like UNEP, that is United Nations Environmental Program, and there's World Meteorological Organizations is also in the framework of the United Nations that were established, and basically those two created this panel. But again, the panel only, what it does, it does the research, it does the analysis of the scientific, technical, and socio-economic information as it's highlighted on this slide. Okay. So one of the issues connected to the cooperation on an international level between the states. That's what we have said. That there is a United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Okay? So initially it could be said about any type of the international agreement as such, but nevertheless it will influence the abilities of the state to regulate the subject matter, in this case, the climate change issue in a particular level. So one of the issues that we also raised is about the timeline. So as you can see, even though it was agreed back in the 90s, so eventually it entered into the force in 2005. So and the commitments that the state had was up until 2012. So eventually what's next? So what's next is of importance. So okay, they have agreed to undertake certain things, but how the takings were to be up to some time. And after those, so the states usually based on those conventions, they're having the regular meetings in order to cooperate further, to discuss further what the steps were taking, what type of mechanisms were used, and how successful or unsuccessful they were. So eventually, as long as Kyoto has ended, so there were certain modifications, there were certain additions made to this document in order to make sure that the states are to still fulfill the obligations that they have provided. So, and eventually what we have, if we look to the timeline, so in 2015, what is important, so we don't have Kyoto Protocol functioning right now. Why? Because there was a new agreement that was discussed between the state in 2005, which is a Paris Agreement. So, and the Paris Agreement is considered to be as one of the new model steps to address the issues of the climate change, specifically because of how does it, the proposals, so to say, specifies themselves. So, Paris Agreement in itself, so we have seen the objectives of the convention, it's of the framework convention, and here the Paris Agreement is such. So one of the things is that what they are trying to promise to each other is that the level of increase would not be beyond the 2 Celsius. So compared with that to pre-industrial levels. So the second issue that they are doing is they are telling that okay, apart from these obligations not to increase, what we are also trying to do is how to adapt. So the temperature increase is still happening. So what should the states do in order to successfully adapt to these increases? So and therefore, what they are trying to indicate is like what type of measures would be acceptable or not, in the sense that it have to be gender friendly, for example, environmental friendly, in order to sustain the food security issues. And the third issue that was provided in the Paris Agreement is about the flow of finances that make them transparent. So Claudia would be specifically telling about the financial part, and therefore we see why it's important. So one of the important, so to say, notions that was introduced, that was established by the Paris Agreement is these are nationally determined contributions. So it's indicated as an upward cycle ambition. So one of the things is that, which you're going to see, there is a Kyoto Protocol there. So Kyoto Protocol was particularly telling that you have to do these things in order to make sure that we are to achieve the goals set. Whereas the Paris Agreement, it's on the reverse, tells like, okay, you states propose us what type of activities you can undertake in order to make sure that we'll meet the objectives specified in the agreement. Okay, so it's like upward cycle of ambition. So basically, it's indicated that each party shall communicate the national determined contributions every 5 years. So as soon as the state becomes the members, so it says like, okay, I'm going to agree on this thing. Right? It's as if imagining you would tell that on quiz I will receive minimum of equals. Yeah? So it's similarly, so they're telling I'm going to do a minimum of these actions. Okay. So and what is indicated that they have to then report on the activities. So how successful they were or not successful to the objectives they have set at the very beginning. Okay. So and eventually, what is important that every 5 years they have to present even more ambitious plans for the purposes of reaching what they have agreed. Okay, and therefore they will do some kind of conclusions for the next national determined contributions. So even though that this is considered to be as an ambitious plan for the purposes of combating the climate change in this issue, so there is a statistics, like so to say, to what extent the commitments that the state are doing would be sufficient to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Okay, so and in this particular chart, what I want you to pay attention to is for this particular line. Okay, so this is the objective based on the Paris Convention, Paris Agreement, and based on the analysis of this particular national determined contribution that the states have made, they are right in between. So as you can see, even from the commitments that the state have already done, it's not, so to say, sufficient for the purposes of reaching the purposes of climate change. So this is the result in the event if nobody is doing anything. So as you can see, the increase of the temperature will be quite drastic by 2010. Okay. So one of the issues right now about the Paris Agreement, that even though it's considered a very ambitious document, for it to enter to the force, it has to it has at this point 133 ratifications. So what, from the legal perspective, ratification means what? From those of you who took part into 12,000. Do you remember what ratification is?
Ratification is when they are signed, when states are signing the agreement, and they are not only signing, but they are obliged to follow what's the instruction of the agreement.
Okay. Okay. So basically, on international level, you're correct. On international level, there are two steps that the agreement may itself contain. So first of all, the states are to sign the treaty in order to make sure that it will be to somehow have certain sort of commitments from the states. But then there is also another requirement, which is of ratification, which means that the state have to make it as an obligation and go through the national processes and make sure that this will become the, so to say, part of their national legislation in order for them to be able sufficiently successfully to fulfill the commitments that they have undertaken. So eventually, so up to this point we have 143, and out of those, if we will reflect on the Central Asian countries, for example, who have ratified. Kazakhstan had ratified this convention, this agreement already. Tajikistan, how do you think about Kyrgyzstan?
No.
Kyrgyzstan has signed it, but it didn't yet ratify it. Okay. So, and Uzbekistan was not in the list, or even of those who signed. So, but eventually, if you go to the web page, then you could see the whole development, like you could see when exactly they have signed it. So, for example, Tajikistan published it, they signed it, they ratified it recently enough, whereas the Kazakhstan they ratified the convention at the beginning of the year. Okay, so basically, right now, I will give the floor to Claudia, and then eventually, if you have any questions, we will keep the class either in the beginning, or if you have them right during the presentation, we will also take that. But right now, we will proceed further with the financial commitments.
Yes. So Kaniki already talked about it. Yeah. So in general, there are these at the beginning, in the 80s, there were these developed countries, more or less. And this division between developed countries and developing countries, where it was more or less clear that the developed countries would kind of pay for the projects and for the activities in the developing countries, because sure, yes, they do not have the financial capacities in the countries to implement all these activities where they already obliged to within the UNFCCC. So during this Kyoto time, it was still the setting that really only the developed countries would pay the money, and the developing countries, so for implementing activities in the developing countries. And with Paris, this kind of shifted a little bit, because you all know that China and India and all these bigger countries, they also in terms of their own development, they progressed a little bit. They are now a little bit more powerful. So in this whole negotiations, there was also the discussion between also US, so why should only we reduce our own emissions and do a lot of activities in our own countries, and on top also pay in the other countries. The developing countries say, sure, we didn't really committed all these greenhouse gases and we are already suffering, so why should we pay for that? And so this new, I would say this new scene emerged a little bit where these growing countries, these emerging countries like China and all of them, they now also agreed on really contributing financially, but also in their countries would now implement activities to reduce greenhouse gas. Goal of $100 billion US. Just imagine the number, $100 billion would be spent after 2020 each year, each year to combat climate change. And 2020 is kind of not that far away, and to compare it, so last year, for example, if you sum up all money that was spent in Europe, in Kyrgyzstan, everywhere, if you sum up all the money, so public money, so governments who spend the money, then this would sum up to 42 million. So in 2016, the public money that was spent for combating climate change or for also helping countries to adapt to climate change, the sum was 42 billion, but all countries agreed that they would spend $100 billion after 2020. So there is a little bit this gap, so how to fill it. But here also, that is a sum that is very complicated to figure out. Also private investors, so I don't know, Siemens investing in, I don't know, energy efficiency in a country X. This is not always counted, because these private businesses, they do not really have to report and so on. So this is a number of that is not really known, and probably this a little bit of the gap that is missing between these 42 billion and the 100 billion per year will be filled by the private sector. But to which amount and what is missing, it's not yet clear. Yeah? So, and in these, so that there may be funds, so to say. Yeah? So banks that have specific funds to invest in these activities. And one that is very new and very different from the other ones, and which is at the moment already the biggest one, is this Green Climate Fund. Yeah? I don't know if you already heard about it. The Green Climate Fund, it sits in South Korea, and this is actually a new fund, and also here this whole changing of the scene, yeah? So that not only developed countries finance activities, but also developed or emerging countries like China, and so this is really reflected in this Green Climate Fund. So this new system in international policy, yeah? And that's why I would like now to focus in my presentation a little bit on the Green Climate Fund. Yeah? So the Green Climate Fund was established in 2012, also within these negotiations within the UNFCCC, and its mandate is to finance a paradigm shift. What is a paradigm shift? It's actually really triggering a change, because we all, yeah, so also all, like Germany, yeah, all developed countries, we are also not really good in terms of climate change, combating climate change. Yeah? So all countries really have to progress and change their economic systems and prepare themselves really to mitigate CO2 emissions, yeah? To not emit more than what they actually, where they are obliged to within the UNFCCC. So this, so the Green Climate Fund really wants to trigger this paradigm shift throughout the whole world, and that's why it actually finances projects mainly in developing countries and focusing, so on the one side on activities where countries, for example, change their economic system to not emit too much CO2. So half of the money, this is what you call mitigation. Yeah? So mitigation means reducing your CO2 emissions by other technologies, for example. And so half of the money, 50% of the money, will be spent for projects that are focusing on mitigation. And as climate change, for example here in Central Asia, already affects countries, yeah. So I talked about this in the previous lectures, yeah. So that's why already now countries not only have to reduce their emissions, but they already have to prepare to the changes that are awaiting for them in the future, yeah. So that's why 50% of the money will be then also spent that is what we call adaptation, yeah? So to help countries adapt to future changes with regard to climate. And the money will be also spent in a geographical balance, yeah? So not all money will go to Latin America, but it should be rather equal throughout the whole globe. That's some of the core principles of the Green Climate Fund. So, I said that the GCF is very different from all the other funds, also because in its secretariat, yeah, so the secretariat is sitting in South Korea, where they then also take the decisions which projects will be financed. Compared to other funds, this secretariat is really compact. So there are 24 members, and half of the members are from industrialized developed countries, but half of the members are from developing countries. So it has really this equal, this equality in also its governance structure. Yeah. So whereas other funds, they had this old approach, yeah? So the developed countries, they decide and they say, in Kyrgyzstan we have to do that. And here we have this equal governance system where these 12 representatives from developed countries have to negotiate with the representatives from the developing countries on which project we would like to invest the money that we have here. Yeah? So this is this very equal governance structure that the Green Climate Fund in itself has. And then what is also really new with the Green Climate Fund compared to other funds is that they really put a lot of effort on the country ownership. Yeah? So this traditional spending of international climate finance was the World Bank goes to Kyrgyzstan, talks a little bit to the ministries, and then afterwards presents a nice project proposal, and then it is stamped and it will be implemented. This, the end there, it's not 100% sure whether really all concerns that are in the countries are reflected in this project proposal. So what is special here about the Green Climate Fund is really that the countries have to have certain procedures that assure that they really give their saying on okay to the project, and also say no, this project we do not want. So that is what we call here this NDA, National Designated Authorities. So the countries have to set up these institutions. Normally it's linked to the environmental ministries or agencies, yeah? And they, in a coordinated way with all the other ministries, they have to come together, have a look at the project proposal and see, this is not actually in our development strategy. This should be changed, or this is contradicting our, I don't know, sustainable development goals that we set each other. Yeah? So they really have to meet, discuss the project proposal, and then afterwards, in a consulted way, have to send their, that is what we call no objection to the Green Climate Fund. Yeah? So the countries really have their active say also in the shape of the project, so that it is not contradicting any kind of priorities in the countries. And then who's actually implementing the projects? There are different options, and also one that is very new. Yeah? So normally, like I don't know, GIZ for example, we implemented projects here with Kyrgyz NGOs, or the World Bank comes, they hire people that will then sit in the ministry and implement the project. Yeah? So this is like normal standard project and development cooperation are implemented. What is new about the Green Climate Fund? So you also have these standard approaches, so the World Bank can hand in a project proposal and implement it, so these international organizations. But what is new is that also national institutions can apply for grants or any kind of funding and then implement it afterwards. So that that is also fitting to this whole approach that the GCF puts a lot of effort in the countries to be very active in this regard. So you have, yes, international organizations that can implement the project, but also regional and national institutions. And all these institutions, they have to be once accredited, and this is a very complicated process. For example, GIZ, the organization where I work, we also applied for this accreditation, and it took us a year to also elaborate still procedures that were missing, because the GCF really supports that countries have their own national institutions, so probably in some 5–10 years the picture will look completely different. Yes, which projects can be financed? Yeah, so there are a lot of options, and as I said, part of it will be focused on mitigation, so it can be some energy efficiency related projects, anything related here, low emission transport project. Part of the money will be spent for adaptation, so really helping countries in adapting to climate change, but then also afforestation, for example, is a possible way of both aspects, yeah, so adapting helping people adapt to climate change, but also CO2 sequestration, so reducing emissions, and then really cross-cutting topics like knowledge management, for example, related to that, or some urban planning, like, I don't know, a transport system within a country. You have buses instead of, I don't know, mushroom cars that emit a lot of not very nice emissions, yeah. So how is this whole project approval process working? Yeah, so it can be both. So normally the countries should really actively coordinate. They should probably invite all institutions that are working in the country and say, okay, here we have these and that priorities. We would like to have a project here. If you want to elaborate a project, maybe we can cooperate here. But it can be also the traditional way that, I don't know, the World Bank comes to Kyrgyz government and say, okay, we have here a project idea, this fits to your own priorities, and then they elaborate based on that project. And this will be then handed into the GCF. The GCF will technically and also content-wise assess the project, but they really want to have this okay from the governments. Yeah? So they send the project to the Kyrgyz government. They, as I said, check whether the whole project is in accordance with the national priorities, and then it goes back when they have this okay, and then the GCF checks these 6 criteria, whether the projects really fit to these criteria. The first is the impact potential. So is the project that is proposed really contributing to these 4 areas that I showed you? Yeah, so these initial results areas like mitigation, adaptation, cross-cutting issues. Then I already introduced this term, yeah, so the projects have to prove this paradigm shift potential. Because normally what is really said is a project comes, they implement the project, they hopefully achieve the goal, and then that's it. Yeah? But what here the project should really do is more. Yeah? So not only achieve the goal that is in the project proposal, but really have this impact in the whole country. So also outside, not only in this small scope of the project. This is what we call paradigm shift potential. On top of that, all projects have to show that they contribute to sustainable development. I think you talked about this in the beginning of the lecture, yeah? So they have, the project proposals have to show that they really contribute to environmental, social and economic co-benefits, like on top other side effects that should be triggered in the country. The project proposals have to prove that they respond to the need of the countries. Yeah, so that's what I said. Yeah, it should not kind of contradict to any kind of priority that the country has set itself. So I said, yes, the Green Climate Fund puts has this very country-driven approach and highlights really the role of the countries in this whole process. And for example, they have, as I said, they have to establish these national designated authorities that then check the proposals whether they are in accordance with national priorities or not. And as this not all countries know how to do that. They, so the Green Climate Fund, they have a specific program that prepares the countries to get ready for this Green Climate Fund. Yeah? And in this program we have 30 million for different activities, and Kyrgyzstan already applied for the money, so there is a project about to start, the FAO, Food and Agriculture Program. they will in probably the next month start helping Kyrgyzstan to really get access to the fund, so that also in the future they can profit from this Green Climate Fund. And yeah, there are different support areas, so you can either, I don't know, use the money for setting up all these institutional obligations, work on trainings with the persons that are working there, but yeah, you can also support the accreditation of future implementers of these projects, or develop, for example, kind of concept notes that can then be afterwards handed into the Green Climate Fund. So, to sum up, what is actually really different about the Green Climate Fund? I think I highlighted some of the messages, but just to repeat, or to summarize, I will repeat some of them. Yeah, so it is different because of its scale and impact. Yeah, so you remember these bubbles. The Green Climate Fund already now is one of the largest funds, and it will grow further. Yeah, so there are constantly new countries putting or allocating money into this fund. So this will be also in the future the biggest fund to spend and finance projects in the different developing countries. The term I introduced, it promotes a paradigm shift. Yeah, so it's not only focusing on these small project interventions, but really to have this bigger impact in the countries. And they really highlight this country-driven approach. Yeah, so we are no longer in development cooperation where the donor comes and says, Kyrgyzstan, you have to do this and that. No, we are in a different working cooperation now. Yeah, so this, and that's what is reflected in the Green Climate Fund. So countries really have to say, we do not want to implement this project. This project is contradicting to our national priorities, but we want to implement this and that project. Yeah. It's different, so the Green Climate Fund is different, and that links this changing in development cooperation. Yeah, is different in its governance structure. So in the Secretariat, I said there are these 12 members of developed countries, but also really 12 members of developing countries, and they have their equal say, and they can really also oppose decisions that are contradicting to their perceptions. It's different also in terms of access modalities. So I said, yeah, in traditional development cooperation, normally only these international institutions could get the money, bring the money and implement it in the country. Here it's different. Really, they want the countries to also implement the projects themselves. That's why here in this Green Climate Fund, countries can set up these national institutions that then afterwards will implement the projects. And it's different in terms of allocation. So it will spend 50% of the money on mitigation, so on reducing really CO2 emissions, but it will also spend 50% of the money in terms of adaptation, so helping countries already now adapt to adverse effects of climate change. And just to give you a number here as a comparison, yeah, so the goal is here to spend 50% on adaptation and 50% on mitigation. So far from these 42 billion that I said, yeah, so only 10% are spent for adaptation. So far the biggest amount of the money in international climate finance is focusing on mitigation, so CO2 sequestration. That's actually it.